And welcome back, Mushroom Man Toad here. This video is coming up late, and I know it's coming up late because I'm recording it after it should have been put up. But that aside, today I've got something really neat for you. You can kind of see it behind me. I can't really look up because there's a barrier over my head, but do you remember those floors from the Team Rocket bases in the Gen 1 games where you would stand on the tile and it would move you all throughout the room? If not, well, you're about to be reminded. So you start on this green tile, and what you would do is you'd step on the tile and it would spin you about and send you down the path, making it a disorienting puzzle that, you had to work your way through. And I figured, well, this can only be about 4 commands, right? This ought to be really simple to pull off in Minecraft. It'll make a neat little video. I'll share the concept and stuff, and download is in the description if you want to check out the concept. And I said, this ought to be pretty simple, right? Wow, was I ever wrong. Yes, it takes this many functions to get this thing going. And now, I'm going to walk you through exactly how these functions work. And it was a real challenge to actually get this to work. And there's a few problems I have to overcome to make it happen. At first glance, it seems really easy. You have one thing for what happens. If I step on a tile facing down like this, I have to spin one way and it moves me, right? It should be 4 functions, maybe 5 just to get things going. But first thing I wanted, multiplayer compatibility. Yes, this thing is multiplayer. I realize you're seeing my rear end. So for multiplayer compatibility, it's got to be able to work on a player-to-player basis. I can't just be sure that there's only ever going to be one player moving at a time. I need multiple players. The next issue was, as you're moving around, it'd be really easy to cheat this by just as you're moving, just walking to the next tile. I have made sure this is not possible. You cannot slide off of the tile that you are moving on. Like, it will take you wherever it wants to, and you can't get out of it. So that is something I had to work really hard to make happen. So this is non-cheatable. Like, once you start down a path, you are stuck to that path until you arrive at whatever place you are going to. Now, the next detail I wanted to work into this was, the rotation feature, but that was pretty simple. So I figured, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an armor stand. And that armor stand is going to move across these tiles as I go, and it'll rotate as it goes, and it'll move. And I said, this ought to be a quick thing to pull off. If you have worked with armor stands in 1.13, you are going to know very well that that is not an easy thing to pull off. And the reason for that is, I think it's this one, is that when you're executing as and at, it's going to take all of the armor stands. So you have to split it, and then you have to make sure it's doing each one separately. It is multiplayer compatible. And I'm going to show you exactly how that works now, because I think I've rambled on long enough. And we won. If you don't care about the explanation, download link is going to be in the description of this video. Go ahead and grab it. If you want to use it in a map you're making, go for it. I'd appreciate some credit. And speaking of credit, I do have to credit Kristen Stuffs a bit for giving me the concept for this video. They're working on their own little project over there using a feature similar to this. I said, ooh, that's neat. I'm going to make that concept as great as it can be. I kind of wanted to perfect this idea. It worked. It was no small feat, and I'm about to show you that. Speaking of small feet, that's the only thing I can see when I shift at this angle. Feet jokes. So this is the first function. It is being ticked once every tick. Now, what does it actually do? Well, the first one is execute as every player, run, execute as at S, and that's just to split it for multiplayer stuff. Run, and then it's going to run a function, and that's going to loop for player. So this is player main. Now, it's also going to execute as at E, type equals armor stand, tag equals toad. That's just the tag I gave the armor stand because I was just testing it, and I used the tag toad out of instinct, and it just stuck for the rest of this project. You're going to execute as at S. Again, you need that for the multiplayer thing, and then it's going to run the function splitter. So what do these do? My apologies if it's a bit more difficult to read now. I had to adjust the window size in order to make it fit within OBS because these commands are a bit long. So this is splitter. This is going to happen relative to every armor stand in-game. And so it's going to execute at S if the block beneath it and a little offset so that it doesn't just stop. Because it would just stop. It'll throw you off the track if you don't have this little offset. If that is magenta glazed terracotta facing west, it's going to run, and again, this is the multiplayer compatibility thing, it's going to run the function for west. And you'll see it's just the same thing here. Execute at S if the block is magenta glazed terracotta facing south with the south directional offset. Run the function floor south, and you'll see that's what all of these top ones are. Then I'm going to skip this one for a second. We're going to go to this bottom one. Execute at us. Unless the block beneath it is magenta glazed terracotta, it's going to kill the armor stand. So that way, all the armor stands that aren't on terracotta will just get killed. That way, there's no interference. There's not a bunch of armor stands left over at the end. This one, if there's no terracotta, you're going to run this function called align B. Remember that. We're going to come back to align B. And then really quick, this one is inside of the south function. All of them just look like this with a different number right in here. So it's always going to rotate the armor stand. This is going to make the player spin around relative to the armor stand every time. And then this is, of course, just going to move. So that's all that is in each one of the directional functions. I just have to set it up like this for the sake of getting the multiplayer compatibility. Again, multiplayer within functions gets really complicated. All right, we're finally going to talk about it. Player main. Where does the armor stand come from? Where does the player come into all of this? It's right in here. So you're going to execute at the player if you have one of the armor stand teleporters near you, and if you are not on magenta glazed terracotta, it's going to run that align B again. Remember that align B. This is where basically the hardest part happened. Then it's just going to run this thing here. Execute at S if the block, and then it's got those relative placements again, facing west, facing south, facing east, facing north. The only reason I have to have these different commands, because I'm sure you notice this function here is the same. In fact, after this point, all of these commands are the same, and that's what runs. Well, you have to have these directional selectors on it, so that is why I have left it as it is. So we're going to go on to player active next. And inside player active, we have two commands. The first, execute as the player at the player unless they already have the entity. This unless bit just makes sure that it doesn't spawn in infinite armor stands on the player. It's only going to ever spawn in one, because once the entity is there, it can't spawn another entity. It's going to run the function setUpStand, and that's just going to spawn in the armor stand. The other command in here is just going to constantly teleport the player to the armor stand as long as they are within the armor stand. So the armor stand is summoned at their location, and then as long as they're with the armor stand, it's going to teleport them. So that way, they'll only teleport with their armor stand, not with somebody else's. Alright, setUpStand. It's going to summon the armor stand with the tag of Toad, invisible, invulnerable, and no gravity. This next command here, you can break it down if you want to. Basically, it just says teleport the armor stand to the player to get its to get the player's facing value, so that the player isn't whipped around as soon as they step onto the block. You're going to maintain your initial facing value and then begin to spin around. Then it's going to execute at the player, and then it's going to run this align, position, position, position. Basically, grab the position of the player, center it on the block, and teleport the armor stand to that position. Notice it's not adjusting those rotational values, so that you're still going to keep the rotational values from the player. So then you're just going to execute as the player at the player and teleport the player to the armor stand. That way the player is set up with the armor stand for when the constant rotation happens that's in player active. And finally, the moment you've been waiting for, align B. So in these commands, inside of align B, you're going to see execute as at S if the block beneath it is terracotta facing which directions. It's going to teleport the player in a certain direction, a whole piece. If you noticed earlier, it was only 0.1. Now it's a whole. You might say, wow, these look really, really similar to what I would have expected from, like, if you were to do a really simple system without all the ordinary stuff. And you'd be right, but kind of. Let's go back and remember when align B is called. Unless block beneath you is terracotta. So you're only going to run align B if the block beneath you isn't terracotta. Then it will grab the block behind you and teleport you in that direction. And that is the only way in game I could get the part where I stop moving after spinning to work. Because what would happen is I would come up to the end here, and when I would come off of the block, let's say I'm right here, I come here and I would just glitch back really fast because it would spawn a new armor stand and recenter me. The only way to get around that is by doing a quick full block teleport ahead. And that is what happens inside of align B. It's going to make sure the player ends up on the block where they've landed, which is also why these spaces have to be 2x2 where the player lands. It's absolutely inevitable. You need it to make this function work. Final thing in a line B, execute at s run kill, the tag equals Toad. So basically, once the player has reached the ending, you just want to get rid of the armor stand because it's no longer needed. You don't want the player teleporting back to it. So that happens the exact same instant the player moves away from it, which is, it does its job. So I told you, it wasn't as simple as you might have thought to pull off a trick like this. And I know that was a super, super overcomplicated explanation, but that's what happens with this function. It looks simple on the surface, but the amount of stuff that goes into it is very complex. And that's what I love about commands. The solution is just never as simple as you might think. Same with these arrow puzzles. It may look simple from a distance, but maybe the solution isn't quite as easy as you might think. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. I hope you enjoyed. Again, if you want to use it in your own creation, like a map or something, go for it. I'd appreciate some credit. But anyway, this has been Mushroom Man Toad. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one. You spin me right round, baby, right round, like a record, baby, right round.